Good morning again, everybody, and welcome to the latest of our BDB Pitmans Building Better seminars. I am Nick Evans, a partner in our planning, infrastructure and public law team here. And this morning, I'm delighted to be able to welcome to speak to us Laura Shoaf. Laura is the Managing Director of Transport for the West Midlands, where she's been since 2016. Earlier this year, she also became the chair of the Urban Transport Group, and earlier this week, she became the interim CEO of the West Midlands Combined Authority. So presumably by some point during the seminar, she will have Andy Street's job. When she took over the chairmanship of the Urban Transport Group, she said she wanted to work with colleagues from across the city regions to meet both the challenge of the COVID-19 crisis and the ongoing transformation of urban transport networks. So there's plenty there, I think, on your plate, Laura, and plenty to talk about. As a brief history, after doing a master's in planning at NYU, she spent several years in the private sector before moving to director the transport for the Association of Black Country Authorities, then strategic director of transport for the West Midlands ITA, as it then was, responsible among other things for the busiest bus route in Europe, as everybody knows, and now managing director of TfWM, CEO of WMCA and chair of the Urban Transport Group. Laura, we look forward to hearing what you have to say with your many hats.
That's great. Thank you very much, Nick. It's really my pleasure to be with you this morning. Thank you for having me. I am not sat outside the depot, but that is one of our new trams arriving from Spain. So I thought I'd put up some of our good news stories up behind me. Nick asked me to talk through essentially just briefly, maybe 10 to 15 minutes about sort of what the pandemic has meant for us. And by us, I mean Transport for West Midlands, but also for colleagues up and down the country who run major urban transport networks. What we've learned and what we think is going to happen in the future. And then I'm really keen to have a lot of questions. I think those are always the best bits of this. So I will try my very best to be focused and brief so that we have as much time as we can to talk about the questions that you all have. So what a surreal year and a half it's been. So there was no way I think anybody was prepared. Certainly we weren't for a global pandemic. And really, I think we've done an amazing job actually as up and down this country, keeping our networks moving for those people who rely on them the most. But I just want to sort of take you through 5 key headings, if that's okay. So what was the first thing that happened? Well, for us, without a doubt, our immediate focus was on how are we going to ensure a safe service for people. So, in the West Midlands, we have a very large percentage of our population who live in what we call transport poverty, but essentially without access to a car or van, who are entirely reliant on public transport. And even when we went into lockdown, there was still a requirement for people in essential jobs to still get to work. So while it's very easy to shut your network down, slow your network down, the real challenge and our real focus was on ensuring a safe service. So that is out in your bus stations, what is social distancing, marking it. It's keeping our frontline staff safe, as they were essential workers and they needed to go to work as well, keeping the vehicles safe and clean, and trying to work through what some of those issues were. So one of the things I think that we did that I think we're most proud of is we gave all of our outward facing staff in the beginning, and they still have them, disposable face masks. I won't tell you what we paid to buy them in the beginning of a pandemic, because this is being recorded. Suffice to say, they're a lot cheaper now. But it was really important for us to be able to make sure that anyone who needed to travel could do so safely. And our frontline staff said it was really helpful to have those to give to people, because not everybody knew what was required. Not everybody had them, not everyone remembered. So that also helped keep our passengers feel safe. So in the beginning, our just first immediate focus was keep people safe. We have a network that people rely on, and we needed it to be safe for them. The next thing we focused on was a bit about demand management and operational plans. So, how are we going to communicate with the traveling public? How do we keep both the message that says this is a safe, clean, operable service for those that need it, alongside a message which I never thought I would utter in my entire professional career, which is please don't take public transportation unless you absolutely have to. I don't ever want to utter those words again, and I'll come on to the damage I think that and the legacy that has done. But then actually, how is our network operating? So again, just a great example here. We have always provided what used to be called a ring and ride service, which is essentially on-demand transport for people with accessibility issues and health issues. Obviously, in the moment, there was just not a need for those people to be traveling. However, we had vehicles and we had drivers. So what we did was fill in our network. So we started taking free shuttles for people who needed to get from, say, the train station to their jobs at any of our key hospitals. And ultimately, we took thousands of people, and we only recently stood that service down to make sure that our network worked in a different way, and we were able to adapt our network to those people who required it, and we were able to provide those services, especially in that time of crisis for those health workers. And actually, we learned a lot about our network. We learned about where some of the gaps are that we now, when we go forward, are going to need to fill in. But really thinking about how do we redeploy what we have, and again, just keeping that focus on those people who needed it the most. The next thing we needed to work towards doing is something I think it probably is a legacy for us all, and still one of our biggest challenges, which was restore trust. How do we restore trust in a public transport network when we have been saying, please don't use it, when I think nationally we've made some quite, we've put out some messaging that's been really quite unhelpful. National campaigns that say things like coronavirus takes the train or the bus as well. And people were and remain quite unsure about actually how safe is public transport to return to. So we've been working on this for the better part of a year, and I wouldn't even suggest we've touched the sides. So we've been running a campaign, we're ready when you are, most recently trying to tell people about the regimes that we use to clean our vehicles, about the safe social distancing that we have, our safer travel police, how we are monitoring and managing crowds, and how we're putting queue busting trams in, and really just trying to give people the confidence to come back when they're ready to do that. The next big one is sort of how do we factor in what do we need to do around an economic recovery? So here in the West Midlands, as our colleagues up and down the country, we are trying to avoid to see a post-pandemic economic recession. So what we want to do is to encourage people to come back into urban areas, town centers, city centers, when it's safe to do so, and to help support the economy. And again, this is a really interesting challenge because I describe it almost like as an accordion. We've needed to expand our services, we've needed to retract our services, we've needed to encourage people to come back, and even as of Monday, we've needed to send out again different messages about what we are asking people to do. We've never asked our networks, our urban networks, whether it's TfL or Nexus in Newcastle, we've never asked our networks to grow and expand and change and retract in line with guidance, and we don't get any more advance notice than anybody else about when these things are going to be announced and how we're going to do it. So putting in extra buses for schools, for example, making sure that kids can get to school safely. How long do we need to do that for? What do we commission? How long do we get those services in place? How do we get the vehicles that we need and the drivers that we need to do that? And then how do we shrink that down when it's becoming redundant and we don't need to do that with social distancing? So it's been, most of us don't have networks that are designed to be actively managed. And of course, in the middle of the pandemic, we've had an entirely different change about how rail is being managed. And so that's moved sort of further away from sort of the devolved vision we had for rail in our network. And obviously now that's run nationally. So again, we don't have as much, I would argue, influence as we'd like to about how rail plays that part of our integrated network. And that sort of takes me on to the final bit, which is really this is when you're in the middle of a crisis, it's really difficult to slow down and pick your head up and try to think really strategically about what is this going to mean. But actually, it's a really big challenge for us, which is, what do we need from urban mobility going forward? I don't think we begin to know all the answers. Nick and I were talking yesterday. There's many articles on the BBC saying no one is ever coming back to work in the way that we know it again. That remote working will fundamentally change the way that cities operate, the way that people congregate, the way that we work together. And then there was an article on the BBC website probably 48 hours ago saying we're suggesting everybody is going to come back to a place of work, and where everybody is missing the kind of face-to-face communication and the space for learning and observing and working collectively. And so we just simply don't have an answer. And many crystal balls, I don't think any of them have given us the answer to what we need. So how are we going to design our urban networks? We're having a car-based recovery in the West Midlands. There's no two ways about it. Some of our networks are seeing close to pre-COVID patronage levels, but not across the board. And if you are based or live in the West Midlands, you will know how much worse the traffic has gotten. That is in absolute contradiction to what people said if they could find an upside to lockdown, which was quieter streets, cleaner air, more walking, more cycling, a sort of change in how spaces felt, and all of that would lead you to think that we would see that sort of step change in behavior. But we seem to have a disconnect between what people have said they enjoyed and what they wanted versus how they want to travel. And that might be very much back to the sort of third point, which is we have yet to restore their trust in public transport. And I was just saying to Nick yesterday, I was logged onto the Silverstone website. That's a whole nother story, trying to find out what's happening with Formula One. And they were saying, well, we think we'll be okay because we're an event that most people drive to, so you don't have to face the danger of public transport. And of course that is a message we just don't want to be repeating. We don't want people to be repeating a message that if you have to take public transport, you are somehow at some greater risk than other people. And there's plenty of evidence from around the world that is not the case. But it's certainly the narrative. And it has set us back. It will have set us back, in different ways across the region, demonstrably in how we go back to having that focus on people traveling sustainably and what that's going to do for clean air and for the environment, which, as a nation we've said is something we've signed up to meeting our targets, but actually our behavior is not sort of showing that yet. So I don't think I can underestimate the amount of work that we still have to do nationally. And that's been a big focus of Urban Transport Group as well, which is to make sure that what we don't see is the government walk away from putting that investment in. So not only into the services that we operate day to day, which are absolutely critical, but also to that future investment, because the economy will return and people will continue to travel. And I guess finally, my other point would be it's really important to me because COVID has had an unequal impact in this country. So there are groups of people who have suffered disproportionately from the pandemic. And certainly in our region, those people often are entirely reliant on public transport. So if we don't see enough funding go into rail recovery, to the bus service improvement plan, into funding our light rail schemes up and down this country, we will see a reduction in service. That is just an inevitability. But what might happen in that case is a reduction in service will impact those people who have disproportionately already been hardest hit by COVID, and that flies in the face of the government's narrative around leveling up and around equality and inclusivity. So there's a really important social element to it too. So as in the role of UTG as the chair, one of the things we are absolutely arguing for is to make sure that in this critical moment, we don't see disinvestment in the public transport network. It would be catastrophic for those people who, as I said, have already been disproportionately impacted. So what do we need from urban mobility going forward? Micro mobility, we're seeing a huge uptick here in people using the e-scooter trial. We've just rolled out a really successful cycle hire scheme. Is it mobility hubs? Is it the 15-minute city? Is it or is it a return to long distance commuting because people are living further and further away from where they work? These are questions, again, like I said, I think everyone's discussing. Many people have opinions, but no one has the answer to. But they're questions, I think, that are important for everyone to be considering. And I think I'll probably stop there and be happy to take questions for the rest of the session.
Thank you very much, Laura, for that excellent overview of challenges facing the urban mobility at the moment. Just looking through the Q&A as questions are starting to come in, I'm going to abuse my role as chair and ask a couple of questions myself, but please don't let that, if everybody else would like to put some questions in the Q&A, I promise I will pass those on to Laura as well. But as an initial question, you talked about the prospect of a car-based recovery, and that's what's being seen at the moment, and the impacts that might have on clean air, among other things. Birmingham has, of course, just introduced a clean air zone. What do you think the impacts of that are likely to be? Is that something that other urban centres could learn from, do you think?
I think, well, so it was mandated, wasn't it, by government for not only our city, but for other cities up and down the country. And I think the challenge is this sort of, you need to have the public transport offer ready to encourage people to get out of their cars. We're offering a scrappage scheme. So if you it's something we're doing in conjunction with the city council, that if you turn in a car that needs to be scrapped, that you can either use a credit towards a newer, cleaner vehicle, or you can use it on your Swift card, which is essentially our regional Oyster card, for £2,000 of free travel anytime, anywhere on any bit of our network. So I think all difficult choices require sort of a yin and a yang, right? A carrot and a stick. And that is part of what needs to happen in order for behavior change to happen. Our job in public transport is the carrot, is making sure that as I said, especially around safety and cleanliness, that we are offering the best, most reliable service for people so that they know that they can depend on it. That's how we'll get the kind of behavior change that we absolutely need. And it's my view that if you look around the world, some of the most fabulous, successful cities in the world, most of them have a mechanism by which they try to manage how many vehicles are in those cities. It's a world-class problem when you've got that many people that want to come into your city, that you need to find a way to manage it. So in my mind, it sticks our city alongside the Londons, the Paris, the Barcelonas, the Madrids of this world, all of whom want to make them clean air in their cities and places that are friendly for people.
Thank you. And a number of the things that you have described, obviously, to provide the carrots to make public transport attractive to people as part of the recovery, that costs money, and investment has been difficult over the last year and apart. What has been the impact on the business planning and investment cycle for TFWM? Have you had a collective pause on those longer term investments, or are some initiatives being accelerated, being brought forward? And more generally, perhaps, how does urban transport compete with other areas of investment as the public finances themselves have to build back from pandemic?
It's a bit of both. So wearing my my local hat, I would say that very clearly that we have a Commonwealth Games that's happening in our region next year, and so there has been no let up in terms of trying to deliver. We've got a huge number of capital schemes, a couple big railway stations, um, bus priority. We've got all sorts of public realm works going on in the region already for the games. We simply have not been able to, nor would we have slowed down for it. In fact, on some of our schemes, we doubled down. So we tried, especially some of our metro schemes where we've got road closed, to go twice as fast as we could. If we could keep the workforce safe, which we were able to do, I think up and down this country, people took advantage of the fact that there were fewer people traveling to do as much work as they possibly could in the moment. Long term, so those schemes that we are imagining now, which we don't yet have funding for, we need to be thinking about are those the right schemes. So we need to go back over business cases and understand if where we are and what we're predicting, those things still need to happen in the way that we imagined them. And so I think collectively we'll all up and down the country have a bit of a challenge, won't we? People say, well, why would we invest in public transport if no one's using it? Which of course is a hugely short-term view to take on investment. So from my mind, we've got a plan. We know what we want to deliver. We understand why people need to move between the places that they are to where they want to go. We understand the demand management. We know the holes in our network, and we need to work to put those forward. I think our job as professionals is always to argue our corner for why our investment is so critical. So, to me, they're the arteries, right? The transport network is the arteries that pump the blood through the body. So they have to be functioning, and they have to be there, and they have to be running in order to move people, to education, to jobs that need to be created. Without it, the recovery, the economic recovery, which we need as a country, won't happen. So I think there's a really powerful argument that needs to be made, but it will be difficult because, as you said, there are a lot of competing processes. But I think most people understand that if you wanted to condemn an area to absolute poverty, one of the things you would do would be to disconnect it and not allow that area to be connected in any meaningful way to any other part of the country. That curtails people's ability to be able to participate in economic recovery and economic growth. So it just needs to be seen as the sort of fundamental building block that it really is.
And presumably describing everything in terms of levelling up is helpful as part of the message at this stage. And another question that we've had in particularly on this area of future investment, given the uncertainty about how people will be travelling in the future, how are you managing your future investment planning to cope with that sort of wide range of future demand that you might be facing?
I think it's about what level. So you've got everything from intracity to sort of intracenter to micro mobility, and I think it's important to plan it across all those levels. And any good transport planner will tell you it's all based on data. And the one thing that we do have now I don't mean we as in transport for the West Midlands, I mean we sort of nationally have better data than we've ever had about understanding where people are going to and from, why and how, and about using the data, pulling in that forward look, what we know that we've heard people say, what our best estimate for what the future is going to be, and then to try to redefine if there is a redefining moment for urban mobility and what it looks and feels like. And the other thing I think is really important is to look around the world and to learn from the best practice about, because we're not. This has been a really unifying moment across the world, hasn't it? Because everybody is faced with a number of the same challenges. So we have some some great expertise and really interesting things happening around the world, trying to respond and react and make sure that we're both building for the future, but equally sort of recognizing what might be some fundamental shifts in the way people want to behave. Does that make sense? Sort of a wobbly answer. I feel like I think so. Put a lot in there, but
the idea of the examples from around the rest of the world is particularly interesting. I mean, are there any particular cities elsewhere that are doing things that we should expect to see in the West Midlands in the next couple of years?
I don't know. I think I'm really interested in the way that Barcelona has sort of turned its blocks, what I would call it as an American, I would call a block, right? Square block, inside out, and how Paris has sort of picked up on how that looks and feels spatially alongside this concept of a what is a 15-minute city. You know, how do we bring resources closer to people? How do we create those smaller communities? How does transport play a role in that? And how do we reimagine our streets and our places? So those are two that I think are particularly fascinating. When it comes to data, it's difficult to not look at places like Seoul, Tokyo, where they just, you know, they have such an incredible sense of data and understanding, and have such good services that relate to it. They also, I think, in the pandemic, gave incredible information to their customers about how and when to travel, in a way that we just, you know, it was really, really fascinating. And their cleanliness regimes, et cetera, those examples from some of those countries definitely were really, really helpful to us. So yeah, they're great. I mean, I think one of the things I miss the most in not being able to travel is not being able to go and learn from other places, because, you know, there are so many fantastic examples from even just around Europe of what really good urban mobility looks like. And I would suggest that, you know, potentially outside of London, the rest of us all still have a huge way to go to deliver that kind of properly integrated, highly functioning urban mobility to the rest of the cities in this country.
One of the areas that you mentioned there, particularly with the 15-minute city, I mean, links into another question that we've had, which is that there's good evidence apparently to suggest that in parts of the West Midlands there could be an increase of up to 20% in commuter cycling. And is there anything in particular being done to support that part of the commuter population?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been slow in the West Midlands. There's no two ways about that, to put the kind of segregated cycling in that we want to. So I think initially, alongside other cities, we were sort of looking at how we do that shared road space, and how we can sort of, what is the hierarchy of road space that we need to look at. But Birmingham Cycle Revolution has put in an excellent segregated cycle route, and actually it's, you know, it's always difficult to get positive news stories, but there's a gentleman, I think, who came up from Worcestershire, came into New Street, picked up one of our cycle hires, and then filmed passing all the traffic as he rode to Edgbaston on the segregated cycling loop, and then shared it with the media, which was actually fantastic, because we had e-scooters in that segregated route. We had our bike hire schemes, we had regular cyclists in there, and with a massive event on it at Edgbaston with the test match cricket on, you know, again, most people I think chose to drive and sat in huge traffic for it. So it was a really ringing endorsement. But getting segregated cycle routes in is really difficult because of the history. You know, being an American, I'm not used to buildings being so close to roads being so narrow, and having so little to play with when it comes to road space. You know, if you go to, you know, out to Utah, what would be a B road would have 3 lanes in either direction and plenty of space. So there's a legacy, especially in the West Midlands, of having very tight roads, having a lot of competing demands. In some case, a lot of houses don't have parking, so there's a lot of on-street parking. So getting to identify those correct routes and then building the sort of segregated cycleway is challenging, but it's in our big part of our transport plan, certainly a big part of our regional and our mayor's ambitions for introducing more of that across the region.
Thank you. And another area that you mentioned, and it sort of fits in with active travel, but sort of not, was the e-scooter trial. And the question we've had here is, what does the early data suggest about e-scooters, particularly in terms of safety? And do you think it actively undermines the drive towards more active travel modes and tackling things like childhood obesity? So I think this questioner was perhaps not a fan.
That's okay. Not everybody needs to be a fan. It's a trial, right? So this is exactly what we're trying to find out. What can I tell you about the trial here? The amount of kilometers, I believe, is to the moon and back that people have used on e-scooters. They've shown themselves to be remarkably popular to users. That doesn't necessarily mean they're popular to everyone else. We've got a challenge, not just here, but all up and down the country. They're for sale. So I often get pictures sent to me of somebody riding their scooter inconsiderately, and it's not one of our rental scooters. It's actually a scooter that somebody's bought legally and is riding illegally. So we've got a real challenge around that. Sort of, how do we manage a safe trial alongside the fact that it seems to be sort of rolling out of its own volition, and obviously very difficult for law enforcement to enforce. We have mixed views on it here, for sure. There are people who are really pleased. It's very popular, especially in the city centers, and most of the journeys are sort of under 2K, so that people are taking them for sort of small journeys. Comes back to that competition for hierarchy of both of space, pavement space, road space, because they are being used, whether they're meant to be or not, on both. So I want to withhold the right to reserve my judgment until our trial is finished, and to understand then how it feels. To date, touch wood, the safety record has been good. And they're in a number of cities with a number of different operators. Those operators are certainly here been very reactive to when we need better geofencing, to trying to pick them up, to trying to lock them down, to making sure that where we know we have misbehavior, that's being addressed where we can address it. So I don't know is the final answer to that. I mean, a lot of our journeys in the West Midlands are short trips in cars. So I suppose you could argue it possibly it's taking short car journeys off the road. You could also argue it's stopping people who should be walking or cycling those journeys from doing that, and therefore not dealing with some of our health issues. It's genuinely one that you can argue from both sides. I think, interestingly, I was very concerned that the e-scooters were going to sort of cannibalize the bike rentals. And we've got e-bikes we'll be rolling those out as part of our rental scheme for anybody who knows, certainly, especially the Black Country. This is not flat terrain here in the West Midlands, and some people will need some electric assistance. I'd probably put myself in that category to make those bikes really appealing. But actually, one of the fascinating things is that they've both been hugely popular, and we haven't seen one succeed at the expense of the other. And that, I think we're probably one of the few regions that rolled them out almost simultaneously. So it's really interesting to me.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things you pointed out there does touch on the breadth of your role, because we've been talking about a lot of things and how they affect the city centre, as it were, the centre of the urban agglomeration. But of course, Transport for West Midlands and WMTA, your role extends into the Black Country and Coventry and Solihull as well. And are there different challenges being faced in different parts of the conurbation?
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got 3 cities, so Birmingham, obviously, the city of Coventry and of Wolverhampton. They're different cities to each other, but they're all cities. One of the things I think we're quite proud of is all of them will have sort of new stations. So Wolverhampton stations is operating. Coventry is being rebuilt. Obviously, a new street a few years ago, but rebuilt. And I think that's really important for our cities because those stations need to become almost destinations. And then Wolverhampton will have the tram and bus station is a really fantastic integrated public transport hub in Wolverhampton. But then there are areas of Solihull that border on rural, and we're looking there with the Metropolitan Council about what can we do around demand responsive. Those are some of those areas where, while we still have a commercial bus network where the patronage is lower, those are some of the areas that the bus operators look to reduce services to. So that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that certainly a number of our more rural parts of this country that make those representations about the sort of declining offer. So how do we use innovation for solving some of those problems? If they're not going to be bus routes that are entirely commercial, then what do we do differently around there? And then interestingly, at the town centers, so government's very focused on centers and a program of centers at the minute, and those are different needs again, and about the connectivity in between centers. There are a lot of journeys that seem to need to come into Birmingham city centre, from which you then change and then leave the city centre to a final destination. And that's something that we're also looking at, which is what are we doing about the in-between centres? Not every journey needs to come through the city centre. And if it doesn't, how are we making sure that our routes look at that? For transport nerds on the call, they'll know that there's a bus service improvement plan as part of the changes that have been announced by bus that we're working up and through over the summer, which is really starting to look at exactly that. So where are the priority routes? Priority routes like the number 50, which we've already discussed today, is the busiest bus route in Europe. For those of you who don't know that, my killer fact, that will have a different need for frequency of service and provision than some of our other routes. And Coventry is looking specifically at real innovation around something called very light rail, which is essentially sort of a micro light system that is lighter than a tram, not as expensive necessarily to put in because they don't have necessarily there some of the same demand that would sort of justify that more heavy rail investment. So finding the right answer for the right place. But lots of interchanges being worked on, whether that's in Dudley or in Sandwell. Two new train stations connecting Wolverhampton and Walsall that are funded and due to start construction. So trying to do some of that infill that connects between road and rail. But my real passion is actual integration, which outside of London, where we all have regulated markets, is proven really difficult. So how do I ensure that every aspect of the system complements each other and forms one complete network, as opposed to having different modes competing with each other on the same network and leaving other parts of our conurbation not served. And that's really challenging because we have a rail network that's currently controlled by central government. We here have a commercial bus network that we don't control, but we have influence over. We do our own subsidized bus network, and we own and operate the tram service. So we've managed a common brand, which is a massive step forward for any area outside of London. We're really proud of that and worked with partners, but it becomes incredibly difficult to integrate that. And going back to UTG for a moment, a big policy argument that we've been asking for is for funding to flow through transport authorities so that we can commission the network that we need. as opposed to funding flowing directly to different operators and them determining what they think they need and we having to react to infill about that. That for us nationally is a massive priority, both the funding and the powers to deliver an integrated network.
And thank you. You're teeing up the next questions very well. It's almost as though you can see them too. But you mentioned the opportunities and challenges around buses in particular, and the role of the transport authorities and the operators. And what opportunities does the government's new national strategy offer in this regard?
It has some great opportunities. So really giving areas like ours a chance to put things like enhanced partnerships in practice across different regions. A lot of what is in that bus strategy are things we've been arguing for a long time around data and ticketing. So it's a great step forward. But my gut reaction is that they have perhaps undergunned how much funding is going to be required to deliver that kind of step change. So again, through Urban Transport Group up and down the country, we continue to lobby to make sure that if we're going to have more devolved to us, that we have the ability and the funding to do that properly. But we've got some great working relationships with the department, especially in that bus team through UTG, meet weekly, working through some of these issues, because I think ultimately, everybody wants the same thing, right? We want a fit for purpose, modern, clean fleet that integrates with the rest of our network that is, affordable and reliable. Most people's transport needs are really pretty basic. Actually, you can stop 10 people and you'll probably get 8 of the same responses about what do you want from your journey. So it's a really easy thing to say. It's a really difficult thing to deliver. But again, the integrated ticketing bit is really key to us. We think we can deliver like a London-style system here, and again, just trying to get the funding so that we can do that, because everyone will know as a passenger, you don't care whether you're on a bus, a tram, or a train, or a scooter, or a bike. All you want to do is get from where you started your journey to where you ended your journey. You want to pay for it once. You want to know that that is the best price that you can get, and you want those things to work seamlessly together. Like I said, I think it's not rocket science to figure out what people want, but it seems to be rocket science to figure out how to deliver it.
And the other area that you've also mentioned, particularly with the 3 new rail stations as well, is rail, and this is an issue for the UTG as well as for the West Midlands. Are there any particular takeaways that you could share for the audience from the William Shapps plan for rail? Are there any specific opportunities and challenges you anticipate? You've already mentioned a possibility of more centralisation perhaps being a challenge, but are there any others, and are there any specific opportunities you think for conurbations?
I mean, I think it says a lot of the things that everybody wants to hear about some of those step changes. This is one where I'm going to reserve the right to judge proof of the pudding, and this will be in the eating. And we've had some perennial problems in rail that are going to be really difficult for us to see change. I know that we in that review it talks about devolution. It puts it quite some time away in my view. Certainly long past my tenure here. I'm sure will be when we start to really see those plans to come to fruition. So I think my only comment would be I was hoping for more regional influence, I think, than we look to get immediately. I think the intent is there for the longer term. But, I take when I'm commuting into the city or to work, I take the train every single day, and I find it fascinating sometimes that I'm having conversations about service and service provision and how it feels to be a passenger with people that don't live here, don't take our trains, and don't know what it feels like. So I do always believe, that a certain level of influence needs to come regionally, because we are users ourselves of these services. So who could possibly know better than us what it feels like to be a passenger on our rail network? So I guess I just hope that through the work of the review that intent, which I think is there, is absolutely recognized. When we had the last award of our contract, we had a big role in specifying some of the outputs that we wanted to see, and it made a big difference to our passengers, whether those were Sunday services, which were pretty poor, or Wi-Fi, or that bit about branding. We understand what our passengers were asking us for, and we were able to make sure that our train operating company understood that and could deliver to that. So I'm just keen to see, as it sort of comes more into fruition, that we don't lose that bit of regional influence for our passengers. I think you're still on mute, Nick.
I've been doing so.
Had to happen eventually.
Well until then. Thank you. And another question that we've had going back to the recovery almost from the pandemic. Are there any social distancing practices or other measures, such as network adaptations, that you think will endure on the TfWM's networks as we build back?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've that step change in passenger communication, which I think is absolutely critical. If I think about the tram, just because I'm staring at it, imagine behind me. One of the things we did was really focus on the data and focus tram provision. We call them queue busting trams, but we know when our trams are the busiest. We know when the most people are using them. Interestingly, it's a different time than it would have been sort of pre-pandemic. We've got different travel patterns, and that's fine. But adapting to that to say, if we know that is a point in the day between 2:30 and 3:30 when we're really busy around West Bromwich, then we'll put another tram out in between the trams to make sure that people can be social distanced. And we'll put somebody out on the platform to say, this tram has got enough people on it, please, if you just wait, there'll be another one coming in between the timetable. So our ability to be more reactive and adaptive, and communicate to the traveling public about, what time can you expect to make the quietest journey. That's on our website, which, if you want to know, what time to plan your travel, depending upon what you want, that is there. That's been huge. And then we have found holes in our network. Like I said, I don't think we appreciated how many NHS staff were traveling from some of our rail networks to our key hospitals. And actually so some of this, we were able to really pinpoint some key places that we want to provide better connectivity for going forward. And we'll be able to do that. Obviously, moving away from cash where possible into contactless payments, something people feel much more comfortable with in that way. And then also just, we've got a great Safer Travel Police partnership here, where we have officers that go out on our network. They're specifically funded between the BTP, the West Midlands Police, and ourselves to provide that sort of safety for people. But just how important that sort of presence is for people. That's extra set of eyes of knowing that somebody's watching and making sure that people are behaving. Customers are nervous of other customers at the moment. People, if they don't have a face mask on, again, just giving them out so that somebody can just walk down the tram and say, here's a mask, you're gonna need to put that on if you want to ride on the tram. Much less confrontational than throwing somebody off the tram. And actually gives those passengers that comfort. So being present, holes in the network and communications and data to provide better services, there should be at least three really good bits of legacy learning that we should use to make our network better going forward.
Thank you. And I think one final possible question that we have here, are there any particular things that we should be looking forward to from TFWM in relation to the Commonwealth Games, as that you mentioned before, as that comes forward next year? What should we be expecting to see from Transport for the West Midlands?
Gosh, I hope a celebration, a much needed celebration of all things Commonwealth. But I hope that what we'll see is a safe and clean and green games. You know, we start now walking all the routes. So, you know, from how it's going to feel from when you come out of a station to when you go to an event. What's that journey going to look and feel like for people? How do we make this region shine and sparkle? And although I don't have a West Midlands accent, I have lived here for well over 20 years, and you know, and I love it here. And I just think it's one of the most or least well understood regions, about its assets, about its heritage, about what makes it special, about what makes its people special. So I hope you'll see and feel a real celebration of the West Midlands through the Commonwealth Games. The favorite phrase people keep telling me is this should be about sport, not transport. Ha ha ha. But apparently we'll be doing our job if we're never on the headlines for any sort of major transport failure. So I hope at some level you don't hear anything about it, but at another level you can sort of feel that pride and that celebration and what it does for the region.
Laura, thank you very much for your time today, and for all the interesting things that you've had to say about West Midlands and the challenges of the transport network there, and the opportunities that everybody sees. If we were in real life, I'm sure people would be applauding heavily. Now we can just assume that they are in the comforts of their own homes. With that, I'd say thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who has attended. I'm told that when we click on the leave button, it will be fairly abrupt for everybody. So it just remains for me again to thank Laura and to say goodbye to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.